Hello, Euro nerds, and welcome to part 2 of this 3-part Edpuzzle series on the Age of Exploration and Colonization. This section is going to mostly cover the important navigators, conquerors, colonizers in this period of time. So let's start right now with Prince Henry, also known as Henry, the Navigator of Portugal. So, again, we know the causes of colonization, Age of Exploration, essentially God, Glory, Gold, but we really want to know the political, economic, and social implications on why they're doing it. So what Prince Henry is going to do is start funding a lot of voyages from Portugal to coastal parts of Africa. Not the interior of Africa, the coastal portions of it. And while he's doing that, he's establishing informal schools of navigation in his homeland of Portugal. The famous school he founds is not really formal per se. It's kind of more like, hey, here's how you learn map making, etc., etc. So it's a more kind of like ad hoc form of school. But regardless, they're at least having a form of education to show people how to navigate the seas, how to make maps, things like that. So talking about the Caravel, keep going here, come on now. Alright, so they initially start with places that are fairly close to Portugal. Again, when we're taking over land, they often use the word exploration, but it's also important to note that that is, of course, a form of colonization. When you are taking an indigenous people's part of land and calling it your own, that's colonization, folks. So if you look at these places today, they're all parts of Portugal. So, why are they going to the coastal parts of Africa? Well, first, getting to the interior is extremely dangerous and difficult. So the coastal parts are much easier, and additionally, they can establish ports. So when you establish ports and military fortresses on the west coast of Africa, eventually the southern coast of Africa, east coast of Africa, you now have places where you can refuel and resupply your ships, so they can continue going. Additionally, when they're taking over these western portions of Africa, now the Portuguese are getting involved in the African slave trade, and they're now going to dramatically increase the size of it. So enslavement has unfortunately existed in human history for an extremely long time, and once Europeans get involved in the African slave trade, it's going to become much larger and eventually become international. So the Portuguese start enslaving West Africans, and eventually they will start importing them to North and really South America, most importantly, at least from the perspective of AP European history. Alright, so next person that is honestly not crazy important compared to some of the others on the list, but he is an earlier founder of this exploration and eventually kind of paves the way for Vasco da Gama, is, at least in English, Bartholomew Diaz. I'm sorry, I don't know Portuguese, my bad. And what he's doing is he's now figured out a waterway from Portugal right to the southern tip of Africa. Today we know that as the Cape of Good Hope, although he correctly called it the Cape of Storms because it's extremely turbulent and dangerous waters right on the southern tip of South Africa today. And it was eventually renamed the Cape of Good Hope because of what could come with the riches from all this exploration and colonization. So really, Diaz is kind of like paving the way for what Vasco da Gama will do, which is figure out a water route from Portugal to India. And we know India, part of South Asia, is chock full of resources, spices, the luxury silk trades. It's part of the Silk Road after all. So Vasco da Gama is the first European to make that water route. Again, why do they want a water route after 1453? Because the Ottoman Turks have dramatically increased the prices of trade for Europeans. So, when he gets to India, he's not just exploiting resources, he's also establishing coastal cities as colonies. So again, colonization is you are taking over someone else's land, and you're establishing those cities as your own, in this case Portuguese. So eventually the French and the English will start competing over control over India, and again, this is all at the expense of the indigenous population. Alright, so you can read this impact of the Portuguese exploration on your own. let's keep going. Of course, Christopher Columbus, Cristoforo Colombo in Italian. So Columbus was a Genoese explorer, and he was basically looking for somebody to fund his trip to finding an all-water route to East Asia, or what he called the Indies. However, none of the Italian monarchs, nobility, wanted to pay for it. He just kept going. Finally found Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon to fund this expedition. Obviously, those are both Spanish monarchs. So he sets off in 1492. Columbus sailed the ocean blue, to use that elementary rhyme. And what happens? Well, Columbus accidentally ran into an island in the Bahamas. Yes, accidentally. Wasn't purposeful. So he gets off the ship in October 1492, and he's like, whoa, India, man, amazing. Yes, he thought it was India. Frankly, he died thinking that discovery was, in fact, India. So now we call this area, obviously it's the Caribbean, but Columbus called it the West Indies, and the indigenous people that he observed and interacted with and enslaved, he called them Indians. And that's where we get the term for Native Americans as American Indians. It all comes from that misnomer. So after this kind of opens up the floodgates for further European exploration into North America, South America as well. Eventually calls this entire region the New World, quote unquote, even though it wasn't new by any means, because indigenous people have been there for tens of thousands of years. And the famous Viking captain Leif Erikson actually ran into Newfoundland hundreds and hundreds of years before Columbus did. So I'm going to read this primary source because it does talk a bit about Columbus's perspective towards the indigenous people. So here we go. Many of the indigenous men I have seen have scars on their bodies, and when I made signs to them to find out how this happened, they indicated that people from other nearby islands came to San Salvador to capture them. They defend themselves as best they can. I believe that people from the mainland come here to take them as slaves. They often make good and skilled servants for they repeat very quickly whatever we say to them. I think they can very easily be made Christians, for they seem to have no religion. If it pleases our Lord, I will take 6 of them to your highnesses when I depart, in order that they may learn our language. So this was a diary entry from Columbus, and he's essentially like writing to Ferdinand and Isabella. And clearly, he is saying the indigenous people are meant to be servants, and we of course know that means enslave them. And additionally, he's flat out saying he's going to enslave 6 of them and send it to Ferdinand and Isabella almost as like trophies, frankly. So that is a primary source right out of his diary, and it gives you an idea of the European perspective towards the indigenous people, is that they are a source of economic exploitation, and additionally they are a source for spreading Christianity. So there is his little trip there, as you can see. All right, so the encounter. So this is going to be the encounter between Europeans, or we should say Europe, which would be like the old world. So actually, let me take a little detour here. When you hear the term old world, that means the world that Europeans already knew about. So that's going to be Europe, Asia, Africa. And of course, the new world is going to be the Americas, so North and South. And the Caribbean, actually technically the Caribbean is part of North America, but regardless, they usually put them separate, at least in this time period of history. So this encounter is going to be the collision between the old world and the new world, and all of the impacts that occur because of that. So let's see, the encounter's effects on, and we're going to have a whole list of people. So first we have Native Americans, indigenous peoples. So historians have looked at the overall impact on European exploration, colonization, and the encounter with the New World. And approximately, by 100 years after contact with Europeans, about 90% of Native Americans died. 90% of Native Americans were dead after a century of European contact, and that is a combination of conquering, enslavement, and the big one being the spread of diseases, smallpox being the most famous because natives did not have the immunity to these European diseases. So beyond that, Europe is going to be conquering this land, and therefore they're going to be exploiting the resources that natives used. Additionally, think about the spread of the Spanish, Portuguese, French, and English languages. That was a form of the cultural supremacy that Europeans are trying to, and successfully did, impose upon the people they are conquering. And of course, one of the longest lasting and most horrific of these impacts is the European enslavement of especially West Africans, the importation of them to North and South America, and the impact of that it's absolutely massive. Think about American history with enslavement. It goes on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So what's the impact of this encounter between the Old World and the New World on Europeans? So it's similar, just kind of like the opposite of what I just discussed, as they're now exploiting all of these sections and demographics of people I have mentioned. So when it comes to exploiting resources, let's talk about like the growing of sugarcane. Sugarcane is an extremely labor-intensive means of farming, and initially Europeans will enslave indigenous people to do that and grow the sugarcanes. And eventually, because of the spread of European diseases, many Native Americans died. That's what really pushes the enslavement of West Africans from the quote-unquote Gold Coast, think of like Ghana, to North and South America, and that's what really increases the size of enslavement. What else we got here? Price Revolution. Give that a star as well. Enslavement's a huge one. Give Price Revolution another star. The AP exam in particular places a lot of emphasis on the Price Revolution. So the Price Revolution is essentially in Spain. They experience a high inflation rate. And basically, inflation is when your goods become, it basically costs more money to buy the same good. Like, I always use, like, milk as an example. Like, when I was growing up, a gallon of milk was, like, $2. Now it's, like, $4, depending on the type of milk you're getting. And that's a version of inflation, it takes more money to buy the same thing, or it's the devaluing of your currency. So the reason for it is because Spain is extracting so much gold and silver from Latin America, and then importing it back to Spain. They are actually reducing the value of their currency and increasing inflation. The problem with that is if you have a stable income that doesn't really change, it now makes goods and services harder to buy, and this actually hurts the Spanish economy. So for us in AP Euro, the price revolution harms the Spanish economy. It helps lead to its slow but steady decline as a major power in European history. Okay, we're going to skip some of these readings here, make this a little shorter. All right, major treaty to at least recognize is the Treaty of Tordesillas. So I've already mentioned that the two main colonizers earlier in our course is Portugal and Spain. And when it comes to colonization, another issue with it is it's going to increase tensions between the countries that are doing the colonizing. So there was a fear that Portugal and Spain would fight a pretty horrific war against each other. So the Pope steps in. So Pope Alexander VI, very famous Pope from Spain, and from the Borgia family, I should say infamous, actually. And he's the one who kind of is negotiating this deal in 1494. So here's what the Portuguese and the Spanish settle on. Basically, they're going to say, all right, here's the map of the world. Anything east of this line, Portugal gets. Anything west of this line, Spain gets. And the reason this is important is it basically is showing you the areas that are going to be influenced by Spain and Portugal. So, all right, here we go. In this purple line, right here. So essentially anything that is west of this line is going to be Spanish. Well, let's look at this. Oh man, North America, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, who are the main colonizers in that area? It's going to be Spain. So, by the way, when Spain is making these colonies, they're labeling it as a new area. They're calling it New Spain. Then you have the Portuguese side. So that's basically everything in this section here. So where is Portugal colonizing? They're taking those coastal cities in Africa, and then they're going all the way around the Cape. They're going to India. Eventually, they're going to start colonizing in what they called the Spice Islands, which today we know as Indonesia, a few other countries as well. Polynesia, to a certain extent over on this area. So that is kind of setting up the initial kind of divide of the world. But what's going to happen, though, is both Spain and Portugal will be surpassed. They will be surpassed by the French and the English. And both of those countries are going to take over Spanish and Portuguese land in the areas they're colonizing through warfare. But it's going to take a matter of a few hundred years. All right, next explorer, colonizer is Ferdinand Magellan. Magellan, once again, Portuguese, and we know he's famous for the circumnavigation of the world. I know, okay. So, again, for us, what he's doing is he first had to find a water route that connects the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans. And again, while he's doing that, he's converting people to Catholicism. So we have to always keep in mind the motives for exploration and colonization: God, glory, gold. So, for example, just in the Philippines alone, 2,000 indigenous people are converted to Catholicism. Today, what's a major religion of the Philippines? Catholicism. So, Magellan ticked off the natives, unsurprisingly, and he was killed in battle by Philippine natives. Magellan soldiers, who are now dwindling, they're down to one boat, they continue Magellan's voyage, and actually it was his seamen who actually navigated the world, and not Magellan, but he still gets the credit for being the captain. Alrighty, let's put a star on Cortez. I know you covered Cortez and Pizarro in Global 1, but we still need to know their impact. So Cortez, Spanish conquistador, and he's going to conquer Central America, which was mostly controlled by the Aztec Empire. So I know you covered the Aztec Empire and their technological prowess. Do you remember your chinampas from last year, your floating gardens? I hope so. And Cortez basically is using some cloak and dagger with the Aztecs, but long story short, he conquers the Aztec Empire in modern-day Mexico. He establishes Mexico City, where Tenochtitlan was, and that again is going to be a central city in what we call New Spain, in modern-day Mexico. All right. Next, we have the conquest of the Inca. The Inca were in pretty much the western portion of South America. Think about throughout the Andes Mountains. And the Incan Empire, similar to the Aztecs, were fairly decentralized. Especially the issue of the Inca have is it's such a large geographic region. It's tough to centralize that and have one seamless control. And then you get a Spanish conquistador can take advantage of that lack of centralization, conquers the Aztecs, adds more land to New Spain. So again, why are they doing this? God, glory, gold. Spread Catholicism, extract natural resources. South America in particular has a whole lot of gold and silver. Okay, so once New Spain is established, Spain's going to create this economic system that is going to help make this exploitation of resources more efficient, and it's called the encomienda system. So there's a lot of text on this slide. I'm going to basically generalize it right now, and I'm going to let you read through the details. But essentially, the Spanish crown is giving grants of land to Spanish conquistadors, Spanish nobility, and they can administer that land, and really what they're doing is they're turning that land into plantations they make money off of. In particular, sugarcane plantations. And the whole point of this is to use the indigenous population to produce resources, in this case, to extract sugarcane, which is the most profitable cash crop there is. Problem with this, well, there's a lot of problems with this, is one, because of this now European contact, the Native Americans are going to start dying from poor treatment, enslavement, and plus the diseases. So the encomienda system is effectively a form of enslavement. So now that the natives are dying, being treated horribly, a Spanish priest, we gotta know him, give him a little star here, Bartolomé de las Casas, he observed, he was a Spanish priest, a missionary, and he observed the Spanish treatment of the indigenous people, and he was a vocal critic of it. He hated it. And unfortunately, though, he said, well, instead of essentially enslaving Native Americans, Europeans should enslave West Africans, import them to North and South America, and have them work on the sugar cane plantation. So De las Casas, yes, was against the use of Native American labor as slaves, but argued for the enslavement of West Africans. So, the encomienda system does eventually collapse as a result of, actually the Catholic Church will eventually not be a huge fan of it, and additionally, consistent revolts from natives. And an important thing to remember is that natives are not passively taking these systems. They are revolting, they are resisting, but again, that difference between technology, it's extremely difficult, and frankly, at this point in time, impossible to overcome. But it will eventually happen by the early 19th century. So this just shows like what the encomienda system looked on paper versus what the reality was. And for us, it truly was a form of enslavement of Native Americans and eventually West Africans to exploit as much of the natural resources from the Americas as possible. All right, you can read these on your own if you'd like to have a little more information about it. Some primary source readings from De las Casas. You can read these on your own as well. All right, we're going to skip this for now. Okay, so, folks, that is part 2. And get ready for part 3 shortly. See you later.